Journalist, novelist and versatile author, Daniel Defoe is considered one of the pioneers of the English novel. Son of James Foe, a merchant from London, Daniel Defoe was born in London the 3rd April 1660. After receiving since his early childhood a very strict religious education, around the year 1683, Daniel Defoe married Mary Tuffley, with whom he had 6 children. In 1692, after starting in businesses, Defoe ends up in bankruptcy, paying its disasters by being punished with imprisonment, opening a brick factory, becoming merchant, ship owner, and by doing some publication as essayist. 13 times have I been rich and poor. In 1702, Defoe was arrested and imprisoned on charges of defaming the Church of England in his essay The Shortest Way with the Dissenter. Around the year 1703, after being released thanks to the influence of the politician Robert Harley, Defoe decided to change its name from Foe to the most sophisticated Defoe. After many espionage trips between 1705 and 1715 and the subsequent departure from politics, Defoe began to devote all his efforts to literature. In 1718, he wrote what would become his most famous novel, The Life and Strange Surprising Adventure of Robinson Crusoe, based on the story of the Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk, who landed on a desert island due to a shipwreck. He had managed, with makeshift means and thanks to his ingenuity, to build from scratch the British world from which he had fled. After an extraordinary publishing success of the book, he wrote 2 sequels, The Further Adventure of Robinson Crusoe and Serious Reflection of Robinson Crusoe. Other minor works followed, including several false autobiographies and numerous novels, among which there is another masterpiece, Moll Flanders. Defoe is seen as the father of the modern novel, in particular the form of prose in which the figure of a single character is at the center of the story, in which the author tries to respect certain consistency and plausibility criteria. Defoe did not create a literary genre, but he was the first to use this type of literary form for a systematic production. Defoe died in Moorfields, near London, the 24th April 1731. As mentioned before, the novel that brought the writer Daniel Defoe to be known all over the world is Robinson Crusoe. The story, narrated in first person, has its center on the figure of Robinson Crusoe, an English middle-class man who decides to sail against the will of his father. After a first shipwreck, the second sea journey ends badly. The main character is captured by pirates and enslaved, and only after 2 years he manages to escape and arrives in Brazil. There, thanks to the help of a friend, Robinson succeeds to establish a sugar plantation, achieving a remarkable commercial success. However, few years after, Robinson decides to go back to sea towards Africa with the intent of capturing Africans as to make his slaves. But due to a violent storm that makes sink the ship, Robinson finds himself shipwrecked on an unknown island and completely alone, since no one else was able to save himself. From time to time, Robinson, after he had managed to build makeshift rafts, comes back to the wreck of the ship to retrieve a few useful items that have been saved from the storm, including muskets, gunpowder, rum and clothes. Thanks to these tools and his ingenuity, Robinson manages to build a house, cultivate, and even breeding some wild goats. He even manages to write down in a diary all its vicissitudes and to recreate a rudimentary calendar. Despite the isolation, Robinson succeeds, even after a long period of illness, not to give up and to recreate the British world from which he comes. A fact of great importance is also the finding of faith by the protagonist. In fact, he starts to read the Bible, the only book saved from the shipwreck. This book has strengthened his faith in God and gave him the hope that sooner or later he will be saved by the divine providence. After 12 years of complete isolation, Robinson discovers a human footprint on the beach, and he realizes he is not alone. A few years later, he discovers that a group of cannibals usually lands on the island to sacrifice and eat their prisoners. Robinson, strongly horrified by such a practice, decides to attack and kill them all. He also saves one prisoner and decides to hold him as a servant. Friday, the name of the servant given by Robinson in honor of the day of their meeting, is a nice and smart guy that quickly becomes attached to his master, who teaches him English and introduced him to the Christian faith through the constant reading of the Bible. With him, Robinson releases two prisoners of the cannibal. One is Friday's father, the second is a sailor. Shortly after comes on the island a British ship of mutineers with the intention to leave on the island their captain and two other men. Robinson decides promptly to save them and to take possession of the ship. His exile has finally an ending after 28 years. Back in Europe, along with Friday, he discovers to have become a very wealthy man thanks to his plantation in Brazil. After their last adventure, a battle against a pack of hungry wolves across the Pyrenees, Robinson gets married, starts a family, and finally decides to set foot again in England, after more than 50 years. In his novel, Defoe manages to show us the story of a lonely man who, in front of nature, decided not to give up, and thanks to his intuition, ingenuity, and trust in God, he overcame overwhelming difficulties. Robinson is in fact the prototype of the self-made man, a person who, despite initial difficulties, manages to achieve a great success in life only thanks to his hard work. Robinson also represents the figure of a Puritan, a person who rigidly follows a morality based on a strict observance of the Holy Scriptures. Characterized by a strong realism, the Defoe's work is an expression of the rising bourgeois class. The bourgeois romances have in fact the aims to highlight the moral, civic and political values of this class. Robinson represents the middle class, as opposed to the landlords. His resourcefulness, courage and common sense are all qualities of that social class that will overcome politically and culturally the one of the landlords. In his book, Defoe explains even the British mentality of that time, that is, that the white man is the civilized figure and the black man is the wild one. Several movies were inspired by this novel, but we will only speak about the 1954 movie Robinson Crusoe by director Louis Buñuel, that is the most similar movie to the book, and Castaway, filmed in 2000 by Robert Zemeckis, inspired by the Robinson's adventures in a modern setting. The differences between the movies and the book are a lot, but we will only focus on the main ones. About the Castaway and Robinson Crusoe main characters, respectively played by Tom Hanks and Dan Hurley, we can see that they are two completely different characters. The Robinson of the movie, as well as the one of the book, is enterprising, knows how to tackle the most difficult situation, is able to cultivate lands, create a goat farm, and build a real fortress. He is a true self-made man. Differently, Chuck Noland, the character played by Tom Hanks, is a person who has a sudden change of character since he is on the island. Well before the incident, he was a person heedless of himself. Later, he realizes that he has to change to survive. He is also a less charismatic character of the Defoe's Robinson. While he manages to change the environment around him in his favor, building fences, houses, and creating plantations, Chuck Noland is not able to do almost anything, and to survive he merely sleeps in a cave, eats crab, and drinks coconut juice. As for the theme of the protagonist's solitude, in the 1954 movie, it is mitigated by a parrot tamed by Robinson, a cat and a dog. Of utmost importance is also the character of Friday. At first Robinson felt no confidence in the former cannibal, but then he will have to change his mind since the love, the respect and esteem that harbors the servant toward his master. The relationship becomes a truly friendly relationship. In Castaway, during Chuck's isolation, there is no one to keep him company. The only object that partially fills his immense loneliness is a ball on which he painted a face and to which he gave the name Wilson. The scene where Chuck and Wilson split up is one of the most touching in the movie's history. We have also to talk about the religious component and faith. Both in the book and in the 1954 movies, the Bible and the Christian faith serve as a lifeline for the castaway Robinson. For example, when a sudden fever struck Robinson, the faith in God gave him the strength to react. Differently from the novel, in the old movie there isn't the scene where Robinson tries successfully to convert Friday to the Christian faith. Instead, in Castaway there isn't the religious component. In fact, the protagonists don't rely on the figure of God, but simply on a package. When Chuck was on the island, he had kept, without even opening, one of the package brought to shore. He even preserved it and took with him on the raft in order to deliver it to the sender. The escape from the island in the 54 movie is very similar to that of the book. Although there are no characters such as Friday's father and the Spaniard, the scene of the clash of Robinson, Friday, and the captain against the mutineers in order to regain the ship is very similar to the book. In Castaway, the escape plan is bolder. Jack manages to build a raft with makeshift equipment, carried by the tide and with what is on the island. After days of sealing, a touching separation from Wilson, the drift of the raft, finally a ship crosses the fragile boat and Chuck, weary and tired, was finally rescued and brought back to the civilized world. I understand, however, that the cuts and the changes made to the two movies serve to make them most suitable for an audience of spectators rather than readers. In the book, I love the detailed descriptions of the actions of Robinson on the island and the characterization of the two main characters. Of the 1954 movie, I rather enjoyed the interpretation of Dan Hurley, very similar to that of the book, but the next part of the Robinson's rescue is omitted. In Castaway, I rather enjoyed the characterization of Chuck, which evolved through time, following the sinking on a desert island, and remained unchanged even after his rescue. To conclude, I have to say I prefer the book more than the movies for the simple reason that the descriptions are very detailed and it's easier to emphasize with the protagonist, although it must be said that the 54 movie highly reflects the novel, while Castaway shows us how a modern man can survive to a return to the origin. And you? What would you do if overnight you found yourself on a desert island?